Hello world, it's Berto Prey 5 Qapla. First off, be aware this is my first reaction to Star Trek Picard, Episode 3, The End is the Beginning, not a full review. I'll do a full review soon, but this is a big episode and it may take an extra day. We'll see. However, in the meantime, too much happens not to talk about it now. Be aware, unlike the full review, there is no spoiler-free section. So if you don't want spoilers, tune out now. So the episode starts out at Starfleet headquarters in the year 2385, 14 years before the main story of Star Trek Picard. We get a great look at these older uniforms, and I really like them. We see a nice future shuttle, but somehow Picard looks even older in this flashback. This whole conversation is Rafi Musiker, who was the first officer of his aboard the USS Verity, if you read the comics, is asking him, what's going on. Apparently, this was the first meeting Picard had with Starfleet after the big attack on Mars. And Starfleet is pulling out of the Romulan rescue mission, and Picard is trying to change their mind. And Rafi is clearly a big proponent of Picard, and Rafi and Picard have gone over this a bunch of times about how to convince Starfleet to do it. And Picard's like, well, there are so many people in there that were against this even before the attack, and now the rest of them have all given into fear, and he never thought he'd see them do this. Some of the crazy things is that we find out Picard was okay with synthetic labor. That means androids. He was okay with using androids to build the starships, but Starfleet said, no more androids. They attacked Mars. All androids, all synthetic life is now banned in the Federation. Although synthetics don't include holograms, apparently. But for reasons I don't know, they're almost the exact same thing, but whatever. Anyway, the point is Picard's last resort was that if they don't accept his plan for continuing the rescue of the Romulans, he would resign. And surprise, surprise, he had to resign. They called his bluff and he resigned, but he's still wearing his comm badge, which anytime a Starfleet officer has ever resigned before or done something even off duty, they take off the comm badge because as a symbol, as I'm no longer associated with Starfleet, they have to turn in their comm badge or they leave their comm badge behind. So for Picard to have come outside with his comm badge on breaks everything we know about Star Trek ever before, at least since TNG, since they've had comm badges. Now, I know the plot needed him to have his comm badge, so Rafi didn't know that he had already resigned the moment he stepped out, but still, I don't like it. So Rafi now is getting mad at Picard because apparently, I would guess, nobody else in the Federation likes her except Picard. And as soon as Picard got resigned, we find out Rafi got a call into the CNC. She's being fired. So Rafi loses everything because Picard resigned. Picard's like, I never thought they would accept my resignation. And Rafi's like, of course you didn't, because to go unsaid there that Picard, he's too nice. He doesn't believe that people can be wrong or mean or whatever. So after this flashback, we go to the present, which is the future. And we're at Rafi's house outside, or really next to Vasquez Rocks in California. And you have to wonder, do they just let anyone build a house anywhere? I mean, she looked like she had more like a trailer, a future. Maybe it's a fly-in trailer. I don't know. But it's like if I wanted to build a house on top of El Capitan or next to Old Faithful or on the very edge of the Grand Canyon, would they let me? Because I hope they don't. I mean, there should still be, if they're not national parks, Earth parks, Federation parks, natural wonders that should be immune from being built upon, right? Like right now, you couldn't go to Vasquez Rocks and put up a house. The state of California, if not the national government, would say, no, you can't do that there. But apparently in the Federation in the future, it's no big deal. And this isn't even like a beautiful, expensive place that Rafi was an important person and got to call in favors. No, Rafi herself, she calls her home a hovel, and it's humiliating to her. She is living far below the standard of living she wanted to be living at. This to her, she's living in trash. And how do the economics of the future even work? And this is a problem that's going to get bigger with this episode, because more than once, the captain of the ship Picard's going to talk about getting paid and that he's expensive, though we don't get any of the details in this episode. Also, Rafi apparently is a drug addict. She's growing her own plants, and she calls it snake leaf. She smokes it. It's nothing even futuristic about it. She just puts it into a pipe and smokes it. There's some dialogue that it might induce paranoia. There's also dialogue that she has other addictions. She's not in a good place. And she also says Picard never contacted her in the 14 years since they last saw each other outside Starfleet headquarters. Picard never once called to say hi, never looked in on her. He went to his vineyard and led his life. Never called her up, never said hello, never invited her there. In the comics, these people were great friends. Picard risked his life multiple times to save her. And now you're telling me that Picard doesn't give a shit about what happened to her? This makes no sense. Okay? Especially if you read the comics. How are you going to tell me Picard never called, and knowing that she had problems, knowing he was the reason she got fired? Why didn't he invite her to the vineyard? He's got a beautiful vineyard, and he's got the Romulans there. Surely there's an extra bedroom. If she wanted to live in the vineyard, he'd have invited her to live there. No, this makes no sense. Picard apologizes for never calling, but she doesn't accept it. Picard says Rafi can see connections that Picard can't, that there was a Romulan link to Starfleet. And then we find out that Rafi is kind of like a 9/11 truther of the 24th century. And in fact, Continuum Trek on Anti-Trekker's stream early this morning, I believe, coined the term Mars truther. Yeah, Rafi is a total Mars truther. She knows that Mars attack was an inside job, and she knows Starfleet was involved, and she says she has evidence, but of course we don't ever get to see it. Picard is like, I can't deal with all this, and he doesn't say these words. He doesn't deal with this conspiracy nonsense crap. He can't understand it, but Rafi can, and so he really needs her. She's like, well, tough luck. I'm not doing any more for you. She says no about 20 times, which makes us know, yes, she's going to come. We're going to see her again. But before Picard leaves, she does say, oh, but I do have a pilot for you. His name is Rios. Okay, so next we're on the Borg ship, and we finally get to see you again. You, the Borg, not you, the person listening to this. You is watching a security tape of Soji speaking to what they called in the last episode one of the nameless Borgs that they were deborgifying. And the nameless were people who they didn't know what species they were. And they said they have a name, we just don't know what the name of their species was. So this is a species that presumably nobody in the Alpha or Beta quadrants has ever seen or heard of before. But somehow Soji was able to speak to this, and again, they're basically in a coma, was able to speak to this person in so-called their native language. Yu says Soji spoke to this guy in his native language, and that was so thoughtful and caring of her. In fact, the fact that she thought to speak to this nameless former Borg drone in his native language while he was in a coma is what made him realize her and realize she was so great, and is why everything that's about to happen is going to happen. How do you speak to somebody in a native language if you don't even know what species they are? You're telling me you know their language, but you don't know what species they are? That makes zero sense. You also says there's no more despised people in the galaxies than the XBs, meaning the ex-Borgs. Then Soji says, oh, in her experience, when she asks for help, people are happy to give it. And you says, funny, that hasn't been my experience, especially with Romulans. And yeah, Soji, that's called attractive woman privilege, hot woman privilege. You ask for help, you get it. You think the whole world is so nice. That's not how the world is in now or in the future. So apparently Soji's been wanting to talk to this deborgified person called Ramda. It's a Romulan name. And apparently Ramdan is a ex-Borg that Soji really wants to see because Ramda was the foremost expert on ancient Romulan myths. I got to ask, how can Romulans even have ancient myths? They would be Vulcan myths, wouldn't they? I mean, Romulans were an offshoot of the Vulcans. How far back can Romulans go before they just become Vulcan myths? That doesn't make any sense. I know Vulcans have had space travel for a very long time. They just, because of logic, they never saw any reason to explore, apparently. So then we cut to a very quick scene of Dr. Jurati outside the Daystrom Institute, looking at some beautiful scenery. And she's listening to opera on an iPod. Yes, an iPod. And then she notices that, hey, the Vulcan Commodore is standing right behind her. She looks and, she takes out her earplugs. And then we can hear the Vulcan. The Commodore, who is the director of Starfleet security, is standing behind her. And she's wearing very, very dark sunglasses. Why is that an issue, you might ask? Well, it's sort of an issue. It's sort of not. I get it. She's a security guy person. She's supposed to be mysterious, but Vulcans are born on a desert planet. It's very well established that Vulcans can tolerate high heat and high light, far more sun than a typical human could tolerate. Vulcans have no need for sunglasses. It makes no sense from a Star Trek perspective. This is why I'm going to be honest. At the end, there's going to be two scores. So Commodore O, just O-H-O, wants to talk to Dr. Jurati about the two visits with Admiral Picard. And that's all we see of that. So now we'll go back to the Borg cube, where you take Soji to meet Ramda, who is apparently, and this is a quote, patient 4822/2. As if patient 4822/3 is someone else. I don't know. I don't get this. Now there's a completely pointless scene where a Romulan security guard said she needs authorization, but then you reminds the Romulan that he is the person in charge. And then, okay, the Romulan steps aside and lets her in. Like, why? Why did we need that scene? So they go into this room. Not terribly big. I'd say like the size of the mess hall on the Defiant. And there's apparently 18 Romulans being held in there. They are, again, apparently the only 18 Romulans ever assimilated that they found. And they've since deborgified. But all 18 of these Romulans are mentally ill now. They haven't transitioned back. Deborgifying 7 of 9 and Captain Picard, they pretty quickly, were able to function on a high level, even if it took 7 of 9 many years to feel like a human being again. Picard was back to being his old self in a couple weeks, but apparently these Romulans have been like this for months, perhaps years, and it's you get the vibes that this is some type of mental asylum. You've got one guy playing with what looks like a Rubik's Cube, some other guy making drawings, and then they say, oh, over here is Ramada, and she's sitting alone at a table, and she's playing with these triangle-shaped cards that look like tarot cards. They all have these different symbols on it, and she's very methodically laying them out. We go back to Rafi's house. And Picard calls her. It looks like it's the middle of the night. She picks up. Why would she pick up if she was pissed at Picard? She picks up, and Picard sends her all the data Dr. Jurati gave him in the last episode on Bruce Maddox. And of course, Rafi's like, I don't want any of this. And Picard says, yeah, you are. You're doing your research. And he says, carry on, and hangs up. So, of course, she starts looking through it all while she takes more puffs of her snake leaf. Then we finally get to a cool-looking spaceship. Now, this looks nothing like a Federation spaceship, but it's interesting. Far more complicated, I think, than it needs to be, but I like it. Anyway, Picard beams up to a big empty room in this ship, and a guy with a British accent that turns out to be the EMH finally gets to Picard and is going to take Picard to the pilot. And as they walk up to the pilot, there's a big chunk of metal stuck in the pilot's arm. The EMH calls for a med kit, which just appears out of nowhere. Rios, who's the pilot, the captain, I'm not sure what, calls for some type of Spanish alcohol. I can't pronounce it. And it just appears out of nowhere. I don't know, are these holograms? Are these replicators? It's like some state-of-the-art starship where you can just replicate anything you want, anywhere you want. You don't need dedicated replicators. You say, hey, I want a teddy bear, and boom, a teddy bear appears. I assume that they're not holograms because the alcohol actually works and the medical supplies actually work. I mean, they'd be terrible medical supplies if they were holograms. You leave the ship and your bandages fall off. That would not be good. So I have to assume these are replicators that just work everywhere. So Rios tells Picard to sit. Picard looks at the captain's chair. He's like, and then he decides not to sit in the captain's chair. The seat he does go to sit in, which looks like a helmsman seat, maybe a navigator seat. There's a book, an old paper book called The Tragic Sense of Life by Miguel Unamuno. Rios says, just put it anywhere. Basically, we've seen Rios. He has a Spanish accent. He's got the Spanish alcohol, and now he's reading a book by a Spanish guy. We get it. Rios is Spanish, okay? You didn't have to go all crazy, all overboard on the Spanish. So Picard knows somehow Rios was the XO of a heavy cruiser. And Rios says, yes, it was the Ibn Majid. Now, I had to look up Ibn Majid. Apparently, he was a noted Arabian navigator and cartographer of the 1400s. I don't know anything else really about him. But Rios says no one's ever heard of the Ibn Majid because Star Trek scrubbed the records. They deleted all records of the ship. So nobody knows he was ever on it. Nobody knows it ever existed. Picard gives a little speech about how he knows exactly who Rios is. He's only been on the ship 5 minutes, but he can tell who the man is. He says the ship is kept in meticulous shape. Everything is up to Starfleet codes and regulations. And he says, Rios, he says, you are Starfleet. No matter how much Rios doesn't want to be, Picard says he is Starfleet. So Rios is like, listen, old man. He doesn't say that, but he says, listen. He's like, either hire me or get another pilot, but don't try to get inside my head. Now, again, hire, how do you hire somebody when you have no money? Is he going to trade him the Chateau? I don't know. We don't find out. They don't discuss it. So we're back at Rafi, and Rafi's got a cool dual monitor setup because she's important. And she's drinking while researching, and I have to assume it's alcoholic. And the computer starts flashing, and it says, crypto algorithm identification, Gorn egg. I think that's an Easter egg. I think that's pretty funny that they called an Easter egg a Gorn egg. I mean, it makes sense. Gorn would lay eggs. They are reptiles. But why is there a algorithm called the Gorn egg? I have no idea. And then they use, and yes, this is what shows on the screen, quantum fingerprinting. Yes, quantum. The power of quantum, she's able to find the origin of this message, and it's a place called Free Cloud. Free Cloud. And then what only looks like possibly the Free Cloud webpage opens on her screen. I don't even know how to explain this. I'll put a picture, I guess. But it looks like it's a casino. There's a person. It looks like they're rolling dice. There's like 6 or 7 red dice and some gambling stuff in the background. Like, what the hell's going on here? I guess there are still web pages in the future. So we go back to the spaceship now. Rios is alone. He's reading a book when the hologram comes online. It's the same guy as before, but now he has an Irish accent. And I'll be honest, my untrained American ears, I barely would have noticed any difference, except in the closed captioning. They made note to say when he had the British accent and when he had the Irish accent. Slightly different hologram pops up, and he's like, navigation sensors are back to 100%. He had to go out and physically clean the sensors. He doesn't know what stuck to it, but it washed off easily. So then Rios doesn't seem to care. He's like, okay, whatever. Then the hologram asks Rios if he's starstruck. He says, you talked to Jean-Luc Picard. Then he talks about all of Picard's notable titles, I guess. That Picard is the chief contact with the Q Continuum. He was the arbiter of succession for the Klingon Empire. He was the savior of Earth from Borg invasion. He was the captain of the Enterprise D and E, although they seem to have forgotten the Stargazer. And and the final thing he says is, he's the man who worked alongside the great Spock. The hologram tells Rios that Picard is on the side of the angels, and it's been a long time since Rios helped someone, on the good side. Rios says he already worked for one great captain, and he still sees that guy's blood and guts spattered on the bulkhead when he closes his eyes. So he doesn't want to deal with this. So he says, computer, deactivate ENH. So ENH, not MH. N, I'm guessing, is the emergency navigation hologram, because he was cleaning the navigation sensors. I don't know. I guess they're going to have a hologram with a different accent for every system on the ship. Apparently, Rios also always has a cigar, which has its own canon issues, and smoking many, many, many times has been talked about as being eliminated in the future. But we see him smoking a cigar. We saw Rafi smoking some space weed, and no, Picard doesn't bat an eye to either of those things. Oh, and then Rios looks out a window, and we get a shooting star in space. Yes, a shooting star in space, because I guess they want to double down that you can have shooting stars in space. The most ridiculous. You would not have a shooting star out of the atmosphere of Earth. And beyond that, Picard, back on Earth, seems to have been watching the very same shooting star. He was looking up at the sky, and the same star that Rios saw looking out into space, not towards Earth, looking out into space, Picard sees as he's looking up at the night sky. So Laris comes out to talk to Picard about him really leaving, and Picard's talks about all the smells of the harvest, and Picard says, he's going to miss Laris, Saban, and number 1, the dog. But he doesn't belong there, and he never really felt at home on the Chateau. And Laris says, yeah, he always had one eye on the stars. So then we go back to the Borg cube, and Soji is looking at one of the triangular tarot cards that the Romulan has, and she says that tarot card it looks like a door. And Yu says its Romulan name, and he says basically it's a false door. And Soji says, oh yeah, all Romulan houses have a fake front door. The real door is in the back. It doesn't make any sense. But I do love how Yu says to Soji, so you're kind of a know-it-all. Yep, she is, because the plot demands it. So then, because Romulan houses have a fake front door and the real door is in the back, apparently, Soji takes the seat from in front of Ramda, puts it behind Ramda, and starts talking to Ramda from behind. And of course, Ramda then gives her permission to sit in front of her and talk to her for real. So you see, the key to getting through to Ramda was to sit behind her and ask permission, because Romulan houses have fake front doors. This is the logic. This is the logic. So back at Chateau Picard, just dumb luck saves Zhaban from being hit by a Romulan disruptor. Yes, the Romulans, dressed like the ones who killed Daj, are invading the chateau. They're coming in through doors. They're coming in through windows. Zhaban and Laris go into total Tal Shiar mode. They're taking them out left and right. Laris takes out a dagger or a knife. Zhaban chooses a bottle of wine as his weapon. Picard attempts to attack one of the Romulans with his cane. He fails. He gets pushed over. Picard apparently has phasers hidden everywhere, conveniently right where he and Laris need them to be, under tables, under desks. You fall on the floor, you look up, there's a phaser, you pick it up, you shoot the Romulan. And then even more conveniently, Dr. Jurati shows up and kills one last Romulan with a Romulan disruptor. Now, where did she get the disruptor? Was it just laying outside? I mean, we never find out. So Jurati apparently is she comes in and she's like very upset that she had to shoot somebody. And Jurati says, well, maybe it was on stun. And Lara says, no, Romulan disruptors don't have a stun setting, which I knew. But in the comics, they did have a stun setting. And I called this out in my review of the second Countdown comics, where Picard himself says to set the disruptors to stun. And I said, that's bullshit. Disruptors don't have a stun setting. And I vindicated, but that just means nobody cared. Nobody cared about the canon. So Jurati says that Commodore O, the Vulcan, came to see her, and she told her everything, because, as Jurati says, she's a terrible liar, which means that we know Jurati is actually probably an excellent liar. And, this is getting clearer and clearer to me. Jurati is probably going to be a bad guy or bad woman in this story. She's been too nice, too helpful, and it's clear she's hiding something big. And they have a live Romulan left to interrogate, because they did shoot a couple of them with phasers, but apparently only one lived to be interrogated. So back on the cube, the Borg cube, Soji is still trying to talk to Ramda, and she's asking if these tarot cards, if they're anything to do with mythology. And Ramda says she doesn't like the word mythology, that mythology isn't even a word in Romulan. And so what would she use as a word, asks Soji, and she said she would call it news. So, and Soji's like, oh, I love that. I love it. It's ridiculous. So Ramda then says she remembers Soji. She met her tomorrow. So Soji says to Ramda, she says, Ramda, you were aboard the last starship ever assimilated by this cube, but something went wrong. And she's asking Ramda, what happened? What happened? What went wrong? Why did they get disconnected from the Borg? And Ramda's getting quite disturbed. And then Ramda looks at the cards, and she's like saying, I know who you are. And she's like, which one are you? Which sister are you? And Ramda's like, are you the one who dies or who lives? And now Ramda's getting totally freaked out. Then Ramda starts yelling, Soji is the destroyer. I don't think she yells her name. She just says, you are the destroyer. Now all the Romulans are starting to look at her weird. Ramda steals the gun of one of the guards, points it at Soji, but then stops pointing it at Soji and instead points it at her own head. And Soji runs and knocks the gun away, preventing Ramda from killing herself. So it's a very, very dramatic scene. Meanwhile, intertwined with this is the interrogation going on the vineyard. They coerce the Romulan into talking by saying they'll set him free if he talks, which, does he really think two former Tal Shiar agents and Admiral Picard are going to set him free, but I guess it does, because he starts talking, and he says that the Dahj wasn't who Picard thought she was, and then he says that they'll find the sister before Picard does as well. And then he, at the same time that Ramdir was saying the sister was the destroyer, that Soji was the destroyer, the Romulan is also saying that the other sister is the destroyer. And then he bites down on his acid pill and spits on Zhaban, but Zhaban conveniently had on an easily removable sweater, so the acid doesn't get to him. But the Romulan who bit the pill just melts away. Meanwhile, Jurati, Zhaban, and Laris and Picard are all watching in amazement, and Picard is like, damn, we lost one. We lost our only hope of interrogating someone. So back on the cube, after this big meltdown, all the Romulans in this insane asylum room are giving the stink eye to Soji. So Soji runs back to her room and calls her mom very frantically and asks if Dahj is okay. And the mom says, "Oh yeah, Dahj is fine. I was talking to her today. She's thinking of getting a puppy." And while she's saying all this, Soji just passes out. So it's like you can tell that the reflex to call their mother is something to do with Soji and Dahj. Something activates in them when they call their mother. So yes, 100% sure, Dahj knew she was a twin, and like Soji knew she was a twin. Soji knew of the existence of Dahj. Dahj knew of the existence of Soji. So anyone who's trying to tell me they didn't know each other, I'm sorry, we have proof right here. So some time passes. Soji has been knocked out until there's a knocking on her door, and she wakes up, and Narek comes to Soji's door. Narek, the Romulan guy from last episode, and asks what happened. I guess he heard about it. And Soji admits that she had never heard of the Romulan ship that Ramdir was on or anything about Ramdir, and she assumed she had read it somewhere in the thousands of unclassified documents, but she doesn't really know how she knew all this. Narek says he thinks he's falling in love with her, and they embrace. And then in the next scene, Narek's sister is back on the Borg cube, and she's got her real Romulan ears back. And she pulls Narek towards her, presumably just after he left Soji's quarters. And they're back and forth, sniffing each other, talking to each other. And I'm getting a really strong Cersei and Jaime Lannister vibe from these two. And I'm guessing they're like, oh, everybody likes Game of Thrones, right? It's very, very creepy. Very, very creepy vibe from these two. And basically, the sister just says that he better get results. Okay, so back on Earth at the Chateau, Dr. Jurati says she came there because she needs to go with Picard. She has to. She says Picard's a good and decent man, and she's a scientist her whole life. She thought that this was impossible, but now she's been told that there is an organic synth out there, and she has to go meet him. And then Rios buzzes into Picard. Picard says, "You're early," and Rios is like, "No, I'm not early. I know my sources tell me things are about to get really hot down there." Jurati says she doesn't know how much Rios charges, but she promises she can pull her weight. And then Rios says he's expensive, but that's it. We don't ever talk about the price again. Maybe we will next episode. Anyway, so Jurati and Picard beam up. Apparently, he's just going to leave Laris and Zhaban on the Chateau. And as they beam up, they see Rafi is there. And conveniently, Rafi has found Maddox. She says Maddox is on Free Cloud. And Picard says, "Oh, of course, Free Cloud." Like, that makes so much sense. Like, he would have guessed that. Like, we've never even heard of Free Cloud. And he's like, "Oh, Free Cloud, that makes sense." So Rafi doesn't like Jurati being on board. She's like, "You never even told me to run a security check." Well, why would he? You said you weren't coming. By the way, Picard asks, "Why are you there?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm not joining your mission. I just need a ride to Free Cloud. So just promise me you'll take me to Free Cloud, and I'll come with you that far." But yeah, Rafi says she'll never join Picard. She just needs this ride, and she won't say why. So Rios is like, "Can we leave already?" And Picard says yes. And he says, "Engage." And then the TNG music plays, and Rios has holographic controls, and the ship warps out of Earth orbit. End of episode. Okay. As a non-Star Trek episode, this was fast-paced. It kept my interest, and I am very much looking forward to next week. I'd say this is easily as good as the first episode. And in that respect, I can match the 8.5 I gave episode 1. 8.5 out of 10. It's good. However, as a Star Trek episode, the cracks are really starting to show. Rios has a supposedly unregistered starship. He's a ship for hire in a world without money. But the ship seems to be state-of-the-art. It's got holograms for everything. Picard himself says it was in immaculate or meticulous condition. How is he doing this? I mean, we're supposed to believe that 20 years after Nemesis, civilian ships have better technology than the Enterprise E had? That doesn't make any sense. So as Star Trek goes, and there's a hell of a lot more canon problems that I will get into, and just Star Trek logic problems that I will get into in the full review. But as a Star Trek episode, I'm more comfortable giving this a 5.5 out of 10. But I'm not comfortable with just saying it's a 5.5 out of 10 without admitting that as a non-Star Trek episode, I did find it interesting and compelling, and it held my interest. So saying it's a 5.5 would be lying, saying it's really worse than I think it is, but saying it's an 8.5 is also lying because it's better than I think it is. I don't know if that makes sense. I'll try to explain it more in my full review. And I'm sorry if you don't like the double score. There are worse things in life. Qapla.